Silly season's over. Parliament's back in session. There's going to be Yvette Cooper giving, I suppose, the most interesting debate this afternoon, which I may have to check out. There may even be another live stream later on, not for the Yvette Cooper thing, but for something else. We'll see. Because all of a sudden, after a summer of like not much happening and silly season, there's all of a sudden several things happening today. And I'm going to discuss in this one. So what seems to have happened is Labour have been sort of mulling things over summer, whilst letting Nigel Farage, dictate the news cycle again. And they've come out with a few little changes today. So we'll go over them. I would characterise at least one of them is really bad, and I cannot get the thinking behind it. But there are a couple of other things as well which might be good. Depends. I don't think there's anything where I would go, yeah, that's definitely the right thing to do. But there are a couple of ones where it might be the right thing to do. So let's kick off with changes in number 10 itself. Now, what I am really happy about, I say happy, not happy, but at least not depressed about, is the fact that 10 Downing Street recognises it's got a problem. It recognises that it has a problem. Starmer recognises that obviously things are not going well for Labour. That's undeniable. This time last year, I say even this time last year, even a bit later last year, Labour's attitude was, even when they were sort of suffering in the polls late summer and autumn, their view was that's because people are impatient for change, but our change is going to take time. We're only just putting the legislation in. Like this time last year, the Employment Rights Bill had not even been presented to Parliament. They were still getting the finishing touches done, getting it ready. Same with the Renters' Rights Bill. I think that was I think they were October or something. So they said, well, this is going to take a long time. The budget, remember, this time last year, the budget hadn't even been announced, right? The winter fuel allowance policy had. That was a mistake. So this time last year, their attitude was, it's just because people don't see what we're doing, but when they do, it'll all be fine. Now they recognise, yeah, it shouldn't be this bad. It shouldn't be this bad. So they are making changes and made a number of changes. So that's what I'm sort of reasonably satisfied. Should we say satisfied? Between happy and depressed. I'm satisfied that Labour recognise there are problems. I'm not necessarily satisfied that they've correctly diagnosed the problems. So the solutions, although it shows... See, for example, there was talk of a reshuffle, like at cabinet level. There's no need for a reshuffle at cabinet level. No cabinet minister is dropping the ball on anything, right? I'm not saying that there wouldn't be better ones for some of the roles, but for now, they are not the issue. The issue is number 10 Downing Street and number 11 arguably as well, right? So one thing that Starmer's done, which I would say is positive, is Darren Jones has been moved from the Treasury to number 10. So he is now... So what Starmer had sort of... What the Guardian have had quite a few exclusives this summer. So they seem to have had the inside track, not only at the Treasury, but number 10 as well. And they were already reporting that Starmer had decided he needed a bit more economic know-how in number 10, specifically to push back against the Treasury. So maybe they recognise that, for example, the winter fuel allowance should never have been a thing. In other words, the Treasury have made mistakes, so he wants to be able to overrule some things, but he needs the expertise there, that's a good idea. That is a good idea. The appointment, what I'm going to say, I like Darren Jones. Well, the appointment of Darren Jones is good for a couple of reasons. The first is he seems to be politically a bit more astute than some of them, right? I'm not going to sing his praises to the rafters. He's still a bit untested in some situations, but he seems to have a decent brain in his head. But the other good thing, he has spent over a year now working as Chief Secretary to the Treasury. So that's like the second most senior role in the Treasury. Obviously, the Chancellor's the most senior role. But Darren Jones has been right at the heart of the Treasury operation for the last year. So he's had that direct experience of Treasury thinking. Remember, Starmer's appointed him now to be like his economics bod in 10 Downing Street. And for that, because his Darren Jones's job, it's quite weird now, it's changed subtly. His job was to help lead the Treasury. Now his job is to basically act as gatekeeper against Treasury's dumber moves, right? So it's his job to sort of kick back against Treasury thinking in a way. So that's potentially positive. Obviously, it's not one of those that I would say, oh yeah, that'll totally work, but because it's a new idea, really. It may work. And given that Starmer wanted someone with some economic chops to help him out in 10 Downing Street, Darren Jones is probably the ideal person to do it. Like I said, he's got a reasonable political brain as far as I can tell. Again, you want to see him tested at a much higher level, but he seems to have a decent political brain, as far as any of them do, because I've got a very dim view of quite a lot of the senior members of Labour, Starmer especially, in terms of their political nous. So maybe he just looks good by comparison. I don't know, but also he knows how the Treasury thinks because he's been working with them. So yeah, that's potentially a good one. So then there's a couple of moves that could be good, but let's flip to one which I think is really a very bad move, which is, so Yvette Cooper's going to give a statement on asylum issues again this afternoon in Parliament. Now, I have two main problems with what Labour are announcing today. The first of which is the Speaker may not be happy with them because it looks like they've announced it to the media before they've announced it to Parliament again. So I expect, I don't know, the Speaker might give her another chewing out again, because technically when you announce a new policy, you're supposed to announce it to Parliament first. Obviously, if there's an emergency, like last year when we had the riots, there was no time to really consult Parliament, right? So you just do, that's fine. But if you've worked on a policy, you're supposed to announce it to MPs before the media. But increasingly these days, the Tories were doing it as well. Labour are doing it. They keep announcing it to the media first, rather than, because it's like they don't see the value in announcing it to MPs, but there is value in announcing it to the media because you get journalists on side because you're giving them exclusives and stuff, right? So there's a benefit. But the Speaker's not happy because it's not how you're supposed to do things. Anyway, we will see. So the announcement is that they're going to make it harder for families to join asylum seekers. Now, you can probably guess that the purpose of that is to dissuade people from claiming asylum. So let's say, because we know how it works, I don't know whether it's misogyny, it's certainly sexist in a way, but the reason why the far right keep talking about the fact that people coming across on the boats, it's not families, it's fighting age men, they say, fighting age men. The reason for that, of course, is most men with a family, the crossing's dangerous and they know it's dangerous. So they don't want to risk their whole family's life. They're thinking to themselves, I'll put my life at risk, get across. If it works, then we'll get you sent across safely. So they're working on the principle, they'll apply for asylum. If they get it, then they can say, my wife and children as well, please. And then we will transport them across properly, not across like in a dodgy raft, yeah? And again, and this is the attitude throughout the world, isn't it? Like men will not put their children and wives in physical danger unnecessarily. Like if they can take the hazard, they'll take the hazard. And again, I don't know whether you'd call that misogyny. It is a bit sexist. But that is the attitude, right? So that is why the far right get to claim that it's like these fighting age men coming across, because it's men coming across who don't want to put their children and wives' lives at risk, so they're leaving them safe on land while they come and do the initial process. This policy makes that worse, doesn't it? Because I get what the thinking probably is. The thinking probably is, if those men know that they will not be able to bring their children and wives across, even if they're successful, that they will have to make the dangerous crossing, maybe they won't do it in the first place. That's probably the thinking. I don't know for certain, but that's probably the strategic thinking, that if they if they think their wives and children are going to have to make that dangerous crossing themselves, they will be less inclined to do it themselves. So that's, however, the practical upshot of this is you're going to reduce the number of women and children that can claim asylum. So you just concentrate the proportion of men. And then you're just feeding into Reform UK's arguments, aren't you? I just think it's insane. I don't, it's not just that it's morally wrong. I always say when it comes to morality, morality is subjective. So I have a quite clear sort of moral compass, but I do accept I don't get to decide whether it's accurate or not. It's just my moral compass. But what gets me in politics is when strategically it doesn't seem quite sensible, because this just feeds into the idea. Because remember, the far right are trying to claim that these people aren't actually asylum seekers, because why are they always men? Are we saying that women and children are not affected by persecution and war and climate change? Of course they are. So it's the fact that the vast majority are men that plays into that. That's another reason why we should have processing centres in northern France. That is why we shouldn't have people coming across on the rickety boats. We should say you can claim asylum in northern France, and we will do a quick assessment first, and if it looks pucker, then we'll bring you across safely. If we did that, you get rid of the problem overnight, but they won't do it, because I think the impression I get is they worry the number of claims they'll get will go up, which it probably will. Because if you make asylum safer, yeah, you're going to get more claims. But the number of claims we get isn't that onerous. It's not that bad. Single figure percentage of the overall immigration figures. But anyway, I'll catch up some comments though. But I do think this is a really bad move. But the second, sorry, before I come to comments, the second part of it that I think is bad is, again, they just keep feeding the asylum beast. It fuels Reform UK. I will remind people, a few years ago, Reform UK were nowhere in the polls. When they rebranded from the Brexit Party, they were nowhere in 2020. They were nowhere in 2021. It's 2022. I can't remember the exact point. I'd have to check. But I think it's about 2022 when, ironically, the small boats issue really took off in the news. That's when they started to emerge. Reform UK, it's not just that we know they're an anti-immigration party, right? They are, everything about them is anti-asylum specifically. You know, they have grown fat on asylum issues. First of all, the Tories getting it wrong, and now Labour. So if Labour are not going to put the right policies in place, at least stop talking about it. Stop volunteering information. You know, I've just been saying, you know, talk about things that Nigel Farage is uncomfortable with. He's not uncomfortable on asylum. He's very comfortable talking about asylum. So don't. Talk about workers' rights. Talk about clean energy. Talk about housing. Talk about better wages. You know, talk about NHS funding. Talk about whether or not you should give British taxpayer money to Islamic terrorist groups, right? Because all of those things, Nigel Farage is a bit at odds even with his own voters. But anyway, we'll catch up with comments now. Roger, they're saying, live session, have you given up on the Reuters idea, Phil? I have, yes. I'll explain it for members in a separate video later, but it was of no use at all. I couldn't even use it once. It's utterly useless. Starmer should stop hiding my bookcase. I wish he was hiding in my bookcase. I could have words with him. But there we go. One Labour manifesto promise that has been kept. There's a lot. There are a lot. Is more funding resources for badger vaccination programs. Well, that is also true, yes. Vaccination in general. I mean, just a little reminder, by the way, because this is a big thing at the moment. We know there's going to be problems because the uptake of vaccinations for children as they enter school, 5-year-olds, is significantly below where it needs to be for herd immunity. You need, basically, for herd immunity, the real herd immunity, not the bollocks that Boris Johnson was talking about a few years ago, you need about 95% of the population vaccinated. So in terms of the school population, primary school, you need 95% of 5-year-olds vaccinated for all the various things we vaccinate for. And apparently it's down to like 83% or something for some of them. So that's going to kill kids, right? That is actually going to kill kids. You have to remember, although we've grown up used to the idea that we no longer have things like polio and we don't have measles killing people and stuff like that, they are deadly diseases. They kill children if you allow them to run unhindered in the population. So vaccinations are really important. Labour are trying to promote that, as well as offering chickenpox vaccinations on the NHS. So, you know, do bear that one in mind. Adults putting toddlers in dinghies to cross the world's busiest shipping channel is disgusting. Well, that's exactly it, you see. But the fact that, that's why it's mostly men in these dodgy craft, right? Because they're not putting their own families' lives at danger. But it allows the far right to say, these aren't genuine asylum seekers, they're not refugees, because whole families flee places that aren't safe. If their land isn't safe, it's not just the bloke it will be the whole family. So where's the family? Well, the family's in northern France. And that's the problem with allowing the small boat crossings. And Labour could stop it. They could stop it dead. All they have to do, processing centre in France. The French authorities are happy with this, by the way. They are more than happy with this. We'd be paying for it, right? And what it would mean is, first of all, you say that's where you go to register. And if anyone did, because I'm not saying it would literally happen overnight, that it would stop, because you'd still get some people either not aware of it, because the people smugglers aren't going to tell them about it, are they? They destroy their own business. So you'd still get some people coming off the boat, but that's fine. The British Border Patrol then pick them, because none of them get across unseen. They're all seen. Nigel Farage is there shouting at them for a start. So they'd all be picked up by Border Force, and all of them, without even a separate agreement with France, not like 50 or 100 or something like that. All of them would be sent back. It would be like, no, and that would be legal. There'd be no issue with that in terms of the Refugee Convention, as far as I'm aware, because you're not denying them the ability to claim asylum in Britain. You're just saying we do it over there. That is where we process claims. So you would pick them all up. Border Patrol would pick them all up and then take them to France. French authorities' permission, no problem, because as long as we are making sure that they're securely then taken to that processing centre, that is all France would require of us, that we don't just take them to the Normandy beach and let them loose, you know, that we are escorting them all to that processing centre. And the processing centre, you would, again, it's just to make sure. There's a few things you could make sure of. First of all, if they've already claimed, because some of them have already claimed asylum in the EU and failed. So you could, not everyone will agree with this, by the way, but in the interests of, you know, dealing with the situation politically, you could say, look, we apply our asylum process to the same standards as EU countries. So if you failed your asylum process in the EU, then you will fail it with the UK as well. So we're not even going to mess about there. So that's the only thing you'd need an agreement with the EU on, just to say to the EU, look, you know, share data, have these people already claimed asylum with you? If they have, can you please deport them? We will even contribute to some of the costs of that. We don't want to deal with them, right? So you could justify that. So then you're left with the ones who have specifically tried to claim asylum in the UK. They haven't attempted to claim asylum in the EU. They've just tried to claim asylum in the UK. So that will reduce the numbers. And then you just need to, you don't have to get through the entire claim, because sometimes it can take a few months. You just have to, in that French processing centre, just be able to say, have you got some decent evidence for your asylum claim? Because if they haven't, it's like, well, you're going to, you know, some claims can be failed really very quickly, right? So, you know, you don't want people staying at this processing centre for months, is what I'm saying. A few weeks you can get away with, because they won't be much better than a concentration camp, if we're honest, are they? It will be basically like a prison. So you don't want them there for more than a few weeks. So you would say, look, do you have the evidence for a valid claim? And if you do, then bring them across, house them, Again, you could have a separate facility there. You could have an identical facility on the British side, but it's just to say, look, you know, and that'll only be for a few months. And there'll be no issues. There'll be no issues with it at all. Legally, there'll be no issues. There will be some who don't like some of those aspects of it because it'll seem a bit unnecessarily harsh. But given the environment that we have, and it's controlled. The point is it will be controlled because a lot of people have this issue. I've seen no end of vox pops with people who say they're supporting Reform UK, and they make it clear they don't have a problem with refugees. They think we should accept refugees. Not all of them do, but a lot of them do. They see, what they see is people coming across illegally, and they say, well, that's not right. If they're genuine, why don't they go through the proper system? Because we don't like queue jumping in the UK. It's a big thing with us, particularly like in Britain. Like queue jumping's bad, and it's seen as queue jumping. And the second thing is they see the photos of it's like, well, it's all just men, innit? So when they're told they're not really asylum seekers, they're economic migrants trying to play the system. They're not really asylum seekers because they're all men. Why would they all be men? And that don't make sense. It don't make sense for refugees to all be men. So get rid of it. Get rid of it. Anyway, so I'm rambling on. Starmer and Labour need to show some cojones and stand up to and push back against the nasty, frog-arched, anti-immigrant, racist crap. Don't think Starmer has it in him. Well, I don't think he has it in him. No, I don't think he's in your face enough, I have to say. So no, I think you're right on that one. I would say though, you have to be a little bit careful. They need to be in your face against Farage and Reform UK, but they have to understand a lot of people now have this idea of asylum in their heads. So you can't act in a way that basically tells the population that they're wrong, the voters that they're wrong. You have to be a little bit careful. But again, the way you deal with this process in France is literally the only way to do it. You're not going to stop the small boat crossings any other way. You're not going to stop them any other way. Because what Labour are trying to do is massively dissuade anyone from claiming asylum. Now, they have made one positive change since they came to power, in that they've made it easier for people with family links in the UK to claim asylum. So they have made that easier. And the reason they've done that, of course, is because that doesn't create a problem. That actually solves both your problems in terms of the small boats and the asylum hotels. Because, first of all, any asylum seekers who can make a claim without crossing the channel will do so because the channel's dangerous, right? So if you give any asylum seekers, you give the option of claiming properly, will do it. So it means they don't have to, take the trip across the channel. And the second thing, of course, if they've got family links in the UK, it means they've got somewhere to, the implication is they've got somewhere to live. So you also don't have to have them homeless or put them up somewhere. So those are the ideal sort of asylum seekers for Labour, because they know that the population at large isn't against refugees. It's against the small boats and the hotels. That's it. It's not really against other things. Some are also against the idea of having like council housing used for it as well, because the British people need those, right? But if they go to stay in their own families, people don't really have an objection to that. So that's the ideal type of asylum seeker. But you can't just say, we'll only accept those types of people, because that's ridiculous. You cannot say that. So you need a better system for the others, for the tens of thousands of others a year. Anyway. David there saying, does Darren Jones's new position put him potentially in conflict with Rachel Reeves? Yeah, it could do. It absolutely could do. But at the end of the day, you have these arguments in politics, don't you? If you cannot exist at the top of politics and have these disagreements whilst seeing that you're all part of the same team still, then, you shouldn't be in that position. So it shouldn't, if you're thinking, oh, will this strain relations? It shouldn't, because people at the top of politics should be mature enough to be able to have these, very strong disagreements and still realise you're on the same team, because that's how you do that. Amy, they're saying, sorry, off topic, your population collapse video. Do you know anything of post-Labour economics? Can point you to a transitory implementation experiment with the concept of not. It depends what you mean. Again, it's a bit ambiguous. Do you mean post-Labour as in the Labour government we have now, in which case there's not a lot of fresh data? Or do you mean something else? The other thing to mention, though, how does an asylum seeker possibly find out about changes in UK government policy? Well, no, you do. Again, no, you can, because if you're going to travel thousands of miles to claim asylum, you're going to do a bit of research first, aren't you? Don't think that these people are suddenly forced to flee overnight like Frodo in the Lord of the Rings. Remember, that's the problem with the Lord of the Rings film. In the Lord of the Rings film, Gandalf bursts in one day, tells Frodo he's got to piss off that very night, and off he goes. It's not actually how it happens in the books. In the books, it takes months. He prepares for months. Well, it's the same thing with an asylum seeker. It may not be that they suddenly have to go. They may have time to prepare for it. So they're going to find out, they're going to plan their journey, basically. They don't just set off one night on the path to anti-Mordor, because this is almost like the reverse, isn't it, going from Mordor to Hobbiton. They don't do that. They plan it. So that will include finding out about the asylum process. So there's a very good chance that they would actually, if the government changes systems, that they would actually find out. Well, I'm going to even say years, actually. It could be for some. But the point is, they don't just go, oh, my life's great. Oh, shit, I've got to flee now. So there is planning. I mean, it's not an easy thing to traverse like a continent and a half to get to safety. The right talking up the benefits, etc., does not put people off. Well, exactly. You could argue that as well. And the fact of the matter is they don't get the benefits that the right wing claim. But yeah, Labour could certainly do that, because that wouldn't be attack. If Labour can attack, I would say even attack the media. None of this nicey stuff. Attack the media and actually say to them, look, you're the ones who are providing the anti-deterrent. Because they could do two things. They could get information out to the public as well as trash the Tory media, right? Because they could be saying, hang on a minute, you're trying to claim that this is this land of milk and honey. Aren't you attracting more asylum seekers? Aren't you attracting more people? Whereas the reality is they get about £8 a week. No one's living on £8 a week, right? And that's once they've passed an initial assessment as well. They don't get that straight away. That's once they've passed an initial assessment. So, it's like, yeah, Labour could. I think they should needle the press more. I think if I were advising Keir Starmer on communication, because that's the other change they've had, they've got yet another director of communications. That's the third one since they formed a government. Which again, in a sense, let's get rid of her because we're back to Starmer again, because this is a number 10 job. In a sense, is a good thing, because it shows that they recognise that their communications is failing. But at the same time, a third one in the space of a year, a third director of communication in the space of a year, also shows that you're not necessarily getting it right. It's a bit like the Tories with their change of Prime Minister. They got rid of Boris Johnson. Okay, yeah, there was good reason to do that. Then they got Liz Truss. Then they had to get rid of her. So there was a good reason to get rid of both Johnson and Truss. So you could look at it as, okay, they had 3 leaders within the space of a couple of months. But if you want to be positive about that, you could say, well, it shows they recognise they had a problem, right? Same with Labour. It shows they recognise that their communications isn't working. I gather that the latest Director of Communications claims that they've resigned themselves. We will not know whether that's true or not. Have they resigned, or have they been told that they're not cutting it? I don't know. You're not going to find out really for years until people are just honest about it. So they may have chosen to resign, but even if they chose to resign, that's them saying that they're not up to the job. Even though I gather they were on Talk TV. I think Max showed me a thing on Talk TV. I didn't watch it, where they were trying to claim, oh, you can't promote delivery where there's no delivery. It says, well, there is loads of delivery. If you don't think that NHS improvements, boost to funding for the NHS, best start centres, workers' rights, renters' rights, more clean energy, more housing. If you don't think that's enough material to work with to promote a government, then I'm going to suggest you're pretty shit at comms. That's what I'm going to suggest. So whether this person genuinely resigned or not, and I accept that the Director of Communications could have genuine grievances, because Labour's insistence, which is a political decision, not a communications decision, to keep leaning into asylum issues, If I were Director of Communications, I would have my head in my hands. I would be screaming at them, the political advisors, will you shut up? You don't know what you're talking about. But nonetheless, if I were Director of Communications, I would be massively leaning into energy, housing, NHS, workers' rights. Hugely leaning into it. Why wouldn't I? It's a huge success story. But if we want to put the positive, so the negative side of it is obvious. It's the third Director of Communications in the space of a year. That is not a sign of a stable ship. But the positive spin on it, it shows that they know it ain't working. So they know communications is an issue. It doesn't mean that they've correctly diagnosed the issues. So is the new person going to be any better? Apparently the new person's was like a Blairite. Does that help or not? Don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Just like the civil service permanent secretary of communication type bod, the former Sun guy. Again, we'll just have to see if that works out. It might. It's one of those things where it's like, when your communications is bad, changing the people at the top might work. Certainly changing nothing won't work. So it's one of those things. I don't know it will definitely work, but if at some point, let's say in 2 years' time, we look back and we go, oh, Labour's communications massively improved, didn't it? Probably changing people at the top was the way to do it. It's just whether they've changed it for the right person. Wangry Pagan there says something like 9 years from Bilbo's 71st birthday to Frodo going on the run, I think. Yeah, because there was quite a few years of Gandalf not even realising it was the one ring. And then when he did, and he went to, he said to Frodo, you're going to have to leave. It was like, you're going to have to leave in a few months. It was not overnight. So yeah, so he had to, so he did it carefully and quietly, and he sold his house in Bag End, and he, went to the Sackville Bagginses. And, he bought a new house in Crick Hollow, and it all made sense. So he wasn't attracting any suspicions. And yes, exactly. And the same thing with actual asylum seekers. But anyway. Oh, sorry, going back to Amy. As in the model of economics that removes labour incentives, so think universal income and no menial work is given a transitory period. All menial labour can be automated. Oh yeah, because these are the huge economic issues at the moment. The huge debate in economics right now, or the real debate, not the populist debate, is very much how you prepare for a situation where, so previous technological advances have always resulted in new jobs being, you get rid of some old jobs because robots do them, right? So you no longer have people in factories doing like, like that American idiot in Trump's team said about, oh, we should have people in America screwing the screws in on iPhones. Like, mate, no one does that anywhere. So you get rid of those sort of jobs, but you create new ones. So with every technological advancement, every technological revolution, old jobs have gone, but new jobs have been created in their place. So you've always been able to maintain statistically full employment. Like even now, we have unemployment in the UK, but statistically speaking, it's considered full employment because we have more jobs going than we have people to fill them. Like we cannot physically fill all the vacancies that jobs have. That's even now. If for all the talk in the Telegraph of, oh, like loads of jobs are fallen, it's like, yeah, we've still got loads of jobs we can't fill, mate. Often there's a skills gap or it's to do with geography, but nonetheless, as a country, we've got more jobs than people to fill them. Whereas you could easily, with the current technological revolution going on right now, have a situation where it gets rid of a load of jobs and it doesn't create new ones in its place, or it doesn't create, because even like people working on AI, you might think, well, you need the people to program the AI. No, you don't. In fact, there's a lot of people working in AI, people with PhDs, who are basically signing their own death warrants by work, and they know it as well. They actually know it. They're by working on algorithms for AI, self-learning, they're doing themselves out of a job. So even the people that write code for AI, because what's going to happen is the AI will write its own code. It's like something you just need to kickstart and it'll do itself. So yeah, I mean, this is very much the thing that serious economists are talking about at the moment. How do you transition to this Jetsons type lifestyle where lots of jobs are taken over, but you don't need people to do them, and so there just physically aren't as many jobs? It's literally the only serious discussion to be had in economics at the moment. You know, not how do we manage the economy as it is now, because that's pointless. The time is, I mean, the economy is in a mess now. We do have a bad, you know, our economic model is terrible, but it's not, what's the point? What's the point in trying to change it so it'll work now? Because in 20 years' time, it'll be fun. We're going to have a whole load of other problems, and we know what those problems are going to be. But yes, last one here, because we have to finish off topic, but is Badenoch looking at a future on the back bench, especially after claiming about a place at Stanford now debunked? She's insane, isn't she? I've done my 1 o'clock video on that. She's utterly insane. It's bad enough having told the lie. Although, interestingly, it's something she and I have in common. I haven't lied about getting a place at Stanford, but, you know, in terms of the basics of her lie, I haven't lied about my past. But yeah, I found out we have something in common. I'll talk about that in the video. But watch out for the Terminators. They don't need the Terminators. They're not necessary. We're doing ourselves our jobs. But yeah, so yeah, Badenoch is. But the thing is, she's been caught out in a lie, and now she's doubling down on it. And like Badenoch said, oh, I got offered this place at Stanford when I was 16 based on O-levels, which sounds bizarre straight away. Like, that is unbelievable. But even if you can just sort of go, oh, she must be clever. Right, okay. But then when Stanford say, no, she didn't, who are you going to believe? Who are you going to believe? Stanford University. Like, what reason have they got to lie? Or Kemi Badenoch, who is a known liar, and it sounded implausible to begin with. Because the story, if you don't know, she claims she was offered a place to study pre-medicine, which they don't even do at Stanford, at 16, and she openly admits she wanted to be a doctor, but she didn't study medicine. She did computing, didn't she? She engineering. She just became an engineer. Her A-levels were not very good. They were similar to mine, actually. They were not very good. They were not the sort of A-levels a doctor has, right? Put it that way. But anyway, there we go. Why don't you peg there saying, Phil, Labour have a message already, a greener, cleaner future, should lean more into that. They should lean more into it, yes. But I would lean into the secure side of it. Greener, cleaner, that appeals to a lot of people, but it's also a bit ambiguous. Whereas secure, I'd lean into the security side of it, because you can then keep bringing up the fact your energy bills doubled, didn't they, a few years ago? Oh, yeah, people remember that. They doubled, right? They're going up £35 this winter, which is well below the rate of inflation, I have to say. But nonetheless, they're going up by £35 a year this winter. And the Tory press are making a massive meal out of it. Oh, bills are going up again. They doubled a few years ago. Not a word from them. And why did they double? Because Russia invaded Ukraine. Again, the link with fossil fuels is obvious. This idea that clean energy makes you poor is nonsense. And Labour should lean more into that. But anyway, they don't. They're rubbish. But we'll leave it there. Thanks for coming on, everyone. Have a great rest of day. And until next time, I'll see you later.